The demographic transition model is a graph that shows birth and death rate through time, as well as the total population growth or decrease of a country as they move through different development stages. We look at birth and death rates as the data that is on the graph, and we can then use that data to infer, so to make judgments about that certain countries' education, how much access they have to good quality education, which leads to better jobs, their access to healthcare, is there good quality healthcare, is it free, is it readily available for all, the role of women, so are women independent, are they working, or are they expected to stay home and have children. And also we can make general judgments about infrastructure as a whole. So when I refer to infrastructure, we want to think about access to clean, safe drinking water. We want to think about access to Wi-Fi, access to electricity and to heating, which we know makes you a more developed country. Before the video continues, we're just going to focus on some keywords that you're going to hear me say quite a lot through this video. So a birth rate is the number of babies that are born per 1,000 people. So just how many babies are born. The death rates then are the number of people who die per 1,000 people. Your natural increase is when population goes up because more babies are being born than people are dying. A natural decrease is when population goes down because the death rate is greater than the birth rate. Before I move on, I do just want to talk about birth rates and death rates. We know from our previous knowledge that birth rates and death rates are not always reliable as measurements of development, because not everybody registers births and deaths, especially in LICs, and also there can be natural hazards and natural events that happen that would affect the birth and death rate, which doesn't necessarily lead to us being able to understand development. But it is really good in this instance because understanding birth and death rates can tell us a lot about education and healthcare without having too much information to play with. So starting our journey through time of countries' developments, and we're going to start right at the beginning with stage 1. When this model was first made, it was made for the UK when it went through the Industrial Revolution. So this would have been the UK before all the factories became popular. So this was back in the UK when it was rural, when it was farming, when it was the primary industry. So now we are going to apply this to countries across the world. So stage 1, as you can see now, is highlighted by a red box. You can see that birth rate on this graph is represented by the blue line. And we can see that in stage 1, things aren't very good because birth rate is high and it's fluctuating. Fluctuating is a great geographical word that just means it's going up and down. We can tell about countries in stage 1 that lots of babies are being born. The additional information that we can infer from that fact is that babies are being born because the jobs are mainly primary, and families will want big families and lots of children to allow children to go out to work, because there are no employment laws in these places at the moment because they're not developed enough. The bigger the family, the more money you make. The second thing is that women don't have access to contraception, so things that stop them from having babies, because these places are so poor and so lacking in education that they don't know, 1, how to use it, or 2, how to get it. So they are more likely to have lots of babies. So we can suggest that stage 1 hasn't got very good healthcare and education so far, just by knowing that the birth rate is high. The death rate then is signified by the green line. And again, this is high and fluctuating. And this tells us lots about the healthcare of this country. So it tells us that people are dying very young because of poor healthcare. In this country, when you're a baby, you have vaccines which will stop you from getting diseases such as measles and polio. In stage 1 countries, they do not have this healthcare. They do not have the money to invest in this. So they cannot do this. And therefore, people are more vulnerable to those preventable diseases that in HICs do necessarily wouldn't be. The second thing we can tell about this stage is that there is less access to clean, safe drinking water. So that infrastructure is not there. People are more likely to become ill from water diseases such as cholera and dysentery, and then don't have the access to medication and healthcare, which would then stop them from dying from it. So the population growth, which is shown by the orange line, is increasing slowly because the birth rate is still above the death rate, but not by much. So that population growth would be very, very slow. Thinking about countries that you find in this stage, then, actually, there are none left in the world that are in stage 1. Most countries now have access to basic healthcare. We do find Amazonian tribes in this stage because they live in the very depths of the Amazon and they don't have access to the wider world at all. Moving into stage 2, then, something quite dramatic happens in stage 2. The birth rate remains high and steady. People still want lots of babies in order to make more money. Women do not work. They are still at home as the family makers, as the homemakers. And also there's still no contraception available. So from that, we can see that healthcare and education is still relatively quite poor, especially focused around women. The biggest change that we see in stage 2 is that dramatic fall in death rate. We can see that it is falling rapidly. This suggests to us as geographers that there is now basic healthcare and sanitation in place, meaning that those preventable diseases that you are vaccinated against at a young age are available. It also means that there is now better infrastructure, which can lead to the provision of clean water. So those diseases that spread because of water become less common and also more manageable because they have that basic medication and that basic healthcare. We can see now that the orange line is starting to increase rapidly. So a rapid natural increase because birth rate is so much higher than the people that are dying. In terms of countries, we find our low-income countries, our LICs, so countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh, who are just starting to go through that development. They're starting to edge towards moving out of primary jobs like farming into those industrial jobs like the factory work. Stage 3 is the best of all the stages, in my opinion, because there are major developments that change a country's development path. Stage 3 is highlighted on the graphic. You can see the birth rate is now falling dramatically, and this means that there has been a huge social change. This is when women start to become independent. This now means that women go to work and sometimes will put careers above having lots and lots of children. It is now also more expensive to actually have babies. So if you think about NEEs, they are starting to get richer. They are starting to become more politically stable. They might now stop children from going to work before 16. So you're paying for a child for 16 years for the food, for the school, for the education, for the clothing, all that sort of stuff. But they're not making you any money back because they can't go out to work anymore because it's not legal. So now women are more reluctant to have babies and focus on developing their family economically. Also, contraception is now more readily available and it stops becoming a taboo thing. Women are now educated in why it might be better for their quality of life. So stage 3 is where the big changes happen, and it's where countries now start to see their fortunes turn around and start to get a lot richer and start becoming more socially developed. The death rate continues to fall as they move into stage 3. These countries, there are now more doctors per 1,000 people because education has improved, as well as there is now more disposable money for healthcare and for infrastructure. Because they're not spending so much money on babies and on population growth, they can now start investing in the infrastructure that they have to make that better. Population is still increasing quickly, but due to the fact that that birth rate is starting to fall, that blue line is starting to go down, the population growth will now start to slow down as well. In terms of countries, we see our newly emerging economies, our countries that are industrialising super quick. They're getting all their factories, they're getting all of their secondary industry, allowing them to get rich quicker so they can then start to invest in their infrastructure to improve the social aspect of their development. Stage 4 is the stage of dreams. A country will see itself at peak development if it can reach stage 4 and stay in stage 4. We can see here that birth rate is now low and it is fluctuating up and down below death rate and also above death rate. Women are now choosing to work and have careers over children. Women are now having around, on average, 2.4 children. That does not mean you have a child and then an arm and a leg. It is an average figure. It's still now more expensive to bring up children because cost of living is more expensive. If you think about in America, you have to pay your university fees up front. Not many people can afford to do that. So it's important to consider how much money it would cost you to have that child. And now women are more educated. They are staying in education longer. They are being told about contraception. Also, the more religious views about contraception tend to be less influential in HICs, so they tend to be more willing to use contraception. The death rate now is low with potential to rise. This bit is important now. Healthcare is now at such a good development. It's now so fantastic. People are now living to a really old age, which is great because people are living longer. So that tells us that they're really developed if their life expectancy is long. However, because people are now living to these older ages, they are now more likely to die from old age, which would potentially lead the death rate to rise. This is not too much of a problem as long as birth rate stays above death rate, which means that there will still be more babies being born who would go on to work in the future and make money for the old people. You can see that population growth has now slowed right down due to the fact that birth rate and death rate are now nearly the same. Here we find our high-income countries, very rich countries which have invested in education and healthcare and also independent women, countries such as the USA and the United Kingdom. Moving on to stage 5. Now, this stage isn't officially a stage yet. It is a stage that some countries are starting to edge into, but it is also a stage you do not want to be in under any circumstance. We can see that birth rate is now low and is below the death rate. It is now culturally and socially normal to have one or no children at all due to the fact that women are now career orientated. Women want jobs, they want big careers, they want executive powers. So they choose to either delay having children or completely avoid having them at all. Again, cost of living now is very high, so it's very expensive to have more than one child. Death rate now is going to go above the birth rate. But this isn't because healthcare has suddenly got rubbish. It's actually because healthcare is too good. This country now is too developed. It's keeping people alive into their 90s and over. So eventually they will die of old age because it is inevitable, which will increase the death rate. It's really important you don't get confused and think that they're going back to stage 1 because they're not. They still have that fantastic healthcare. It's just the fact that because you are older, you are more likely to die. There is now a low working age population because of that low birth rate. Not many babies are being born to go upon working to go into working age to make money for the country. But there are now older people, more older people who are claiming pension from the government. So they're not making the money back from the old people who are claiming it. Therefore, the country starts to lose money. And this is why we do not want to be in stage 5. The population will start to decrease. So we'll start to see a natural decrease, which leads to all of those problems that I have just said. Countries here, we are seeing our most developed HICs. Countries like Japan and Germany are going to find themselves here if they do nothing about their low birth rates. They are becoming in danger of going into natural decrease, which no country wants. The DTM is fantastic in terms of allowing us to make judgments about the development of a country from only 2 pieces of data. However, as fantastic geographers, we have to be critical of everything we see. So here are 4 ideas that you should be thinking about if you want to be getting a grade 7 or above. We have to evaluate everything we see. So this model is based on the development path of European countries during the Industrial Revolution. It is something that we call Eurocentric. It suggests that all countries will follow the same path. 4 countries that have got rich very quickly because of resources, like the United Arab Emirates with their oil, they haven't followed the primary industry, secondary industry, tertiary industry route. They have gone from primary industry straight all the way through to that tertiary industry of selling all that oil. So they haven't followed the same development path. Some countries can skip stages. You learnt about China and the one-child policy. They had massive population in stage 2. The government said you couldn't have more than 1 baby, so they jumped straight from stage 2, where they had massive population growth, to stage 4, where their birth rate dropped really dramatically. And now they have the potential problem where they have all the old people that they had before the one child policy with no babies to replace those working age people. It only takes into consideration natural population increase or decrease. It does not account for migration. So, for example, in theory, Japan would be in stage 5. But because they are hiring lots of people from South Korea to improve that working age population, they are going to see an increase in their population. But because this graph does not account for that, we wouldn't see that. And we could assume that Japan is going to start becoming poorer and not making as much money. And then the final thing to think about is that it does not consider events which would make birth and death rates dramatically drop. For example, in Syria, there is a war, so death rates would be higher, birth rates might drop because babies might be dying sooner and things like that. There is no way to know what's happening based on natural disasters in this graph, so it wouldn't give us a fair representation of the country's development. And that is the demographic transition model, a core theory and a core model that you have to know to be a fantastic geographer.